Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt on our 4th of July special broadcast. I hope you're going to have a great Independence Day today. It has been my tradition for many, many years. I don't know how many, but for many, many years on the 4th of July to introduce you to the upcoming Daniel Silva novel. The brand new one is A Death in Cornwall. Very surprising, very satisfactory. Daniel Silva is back to talk about his 24th Gabriel Allon novel. Good morning, Daniel Silva. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I am
Happy
great.
Happy 4th of July. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you. And to you.
And to our British listeners, happy Election Day.
That's it. It's so ironic and serendipitous that the death in Cornwall has a British subplot that you've got to talk about here. The fact of the matter is we've been doing interviews since I think Tony Blair was PM, and then Gordon Wood, and then, of course, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, now Rishi Sunak. And you know what? Today, I think they might be hoping for a respectable trouncing, but they're going to get utterly annihilated because they deserve it, Danny. Do you have any predictions on that?
You're quoting back a line from the
yes.
from the novel, and so I'm gonna just. Look, they gave up on trying to win the election several weeks before the election. I don't know how carefully you are following the day-to-day news. There was a poll that YouGov put out in late June that predicted an absolute, utter annihilation that would really, some commentators are talking, writing the obituary of the Conservative Party as we know it.
The Tory Party is 200 years old. It will come back, but it's going to be like the Conservative Party in Canada got wiped out 20 years ago, and they're going to get wiped out. Nigel Farage might be on the front bench opposite Prime Minister Starmer, and that might be good for the country.
That would be good for the country?
Just to get the Tories utterly decimated so that they go back to Thatcherism. And they don't want to become a Farage party. They want to get back to Thatcherism. Ben Wallace is my favorite Tory, and he left the government. He's so disgusted.
Yeah, I think that I'm not a fan of Mr. Farage, as you might imagine.
I do.
He had some lovely things to say about Vladimir Putin during the final stretch run of the.
And I don't think he would fix the London laundromat either. But Ben Wallace is a serious man.
I don't think so either. Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
We will. Let me begin by telling people that this is a great book, and I really like everything except one line. There's a character introduced early. I'm no spoilers. I don't do spoilers. But there's a new character, Home Secretary Hugh Graves. And I imagine that Hugh Graves had to be named Hugh because of Hugh Grant. And because the one line I hate in this is that, quote, Hugh always said the right things about the war in Ukraine, but I was never sure his heart was really in it. I am a big supporter of helping Ukraine. So I think Ben Wallace is the good guy here. And Hugh Graves is he's a Ukraine skeptic, and I don't want them to be power. What do you think about Labor in today's election? You think they're going to be solid behind Ukraine?
I do.
I hope so.
I don't see why they wouldn't. I do imagine that a Keir Starmer government is going to be foursquare behind trying to help the Ukrainian government to the extent possible win. And not be slowly wiped out by the Russians.
I agree.
And we had a lull in our aid. We had a shift on the battlefield. The Russians were making a tremendous amount of battlefield progress for a while, and that has slowed. And we are inching back towards more of a stalemate situation. And you can easily imagine the war going on for a long, long time. And it already has gone on for a long time. But just to get back to your original point, I've heard nothing that Keir Starmer or the Labour spokesman have said in the weeks leading up to the election that they're not going to be foursquare behind the Ukrainians.
I worry about the Tories because David Cameron's been soft on supporting Israel, and I worry about Labor because they've got Jeremy Corbett's wing in there, Corbyn, and we just got to support Ukraine and Israel, and we'll come back to that. But we want to get back to the novel A Death in Cornwall.
Okay.
First, easy question: Do you personally eat Chinese food?
I avoid Chinese food. Yeah.
I thought so. I didn't know that Gabriel Allon didn't like Chinese food until I read this book.
Chinese food. No. It I have to tell you that soy sauce and fish salt and the high sodium content and there are some dishes of Chinese food that I really like. I like the taste of them, and I always regret eating Chinese food. So it's not that I don't like Chinese food. I avoid eating Chinese food. How about that for an answer?
That's a new detail about Gabriel Allon. I want to tell old-time readers actually, let me tell new readers, you don't have to have read anything before this book. You can get A Death in Cornwall. If you've never read a Danny Silva novel, you can get A Death in Cornwall by Daniel Silva at Daniel Silva Book on X, or order it from Amazon or any bookseller, and you will be fine, because the craft of thriller writing requires backstories, and I think this should be taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop. Both page 18, you throw in the Isherwood stuff, Tiepolo, Restoration, Oliver Dimbley is back, and then you do a backstory on Christopher Keller along about page 238, which is just artful, because you don't want new readers not to understand, right? But it's hard to jam it all in, but you do it. It's a craft.
I guess that what I discovered several years ago is that in trying to analyze how I go about it is that I'm writing the book at about 3 different levels and layers, and for 3 different types of people. The absolute new reader, the occasional reader, and then there's a group of people, and I know this, they go back and they read, all or much of the backlist before the new book comes out. So in effect, they know the books better than I do. And so I've tried to develop a technique that, reintroduces a character like Gabriel and his wife and his children and the connections that he has to the London art world, for example, without a big block of backstory. And trying to explain it in a block of backstory is actually quite difficult. At this point, I forget how many, are we 25 novels in? I forget how many Gabriel Allon novels. And so, but Christopher, his actions at the end of the novel, he was so critical to the way that of the climax of the novel that I needed to spell out. He's the link. He's sort of the character that pulls all the pieces together in the end. And so I did give him sort of a to Z telling of his life, his very interesting life. But I'm glad you noticed that, because
I think it's absolutely essential, because some people pick up a book in an airport and they can't get lost in all these. There are familiar characters like Sarah Bancroft and Isherwood Fine Arts, and I mean, you even bring back some old baddies. Abdul Aziz Al-Bakari makes a cameo reference in here, and I'm thinking, I love this, but it's the craft of telling people who are new what's going on. The third level, though, which is what we're going to get to after the first break, the third level is the art world. And I am so much smarter this week than I was last week about Picasso because of this book. And have you made him the centerpiece before?
I've never used a Picasso in any plot device of the book. Just one little side note about Picasso is that readers of the series know that Julian Isherwood, this very British art dealer, was actually born in he is of German Jewish heritage, and he was living in Paris with his art dealer father in 1940 when the Germans came to town, and he actually lived next door to Pablo Picasso on the Rue de la Boetie, and used to hang out in Picasso's studio.
That isn't. It's so wonderful that Picasso finally gets the starring role. It's a 1937 surrealist painting of a woman in a mirror. We'll talk about that after the break. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. Daniel Silva is my guest, as he is every 4th of July. His brand new book, A Death in Cornwall, can be ordered today. It'll be in your hands in 3 days when the book is released. And it's a wonderful 4th of July tradition. This is, as I said, very surprising and very satisfactory. And the London Laundromat plays an essential role to it. So this is our short segment, Daniel Silva. So tell people about the London Laundromat.
The London Laundromat is the term of art that has come into existence. I trace it to the Financial Times, actually, to describe London's very large and very important financial sector. And it is not an exaggeration to say that London has become the money laundering capital of the world. That every kleptocrat and dictator and person who earns their money corruptly goes to London to help them turn that dirty money into clean money and to put it into posh British property and to stash it overseas and in shell corporations. And so London has become the money laundering capital of the world. Of course, much of the dirty money that has been flowing into London for the last 20 years or so is Russian in origin. And it has had in my opinion, a disastrous effect on British business and British society and British politics. And a couple of years ago, the British government, the Parliament, acknowledged this in the fascinating Russia report that the Kremlin set out to rot British politics, corrupt British industry, corrupt British institutions by using its money. And it did so with the help of British wealth managers and bankers and lawyers and estate agents who welcomed that Russian money and helped to launder it.
You know, anyone familiar with the Panama Papers? I was thinking about the Panama Papers as soon as I started. Early on in the book, you'll figure out that, oh boy, this has got an echo of the Panama Papers if you know what it is. But you obviously dove deep into that, Daniel Silva.
I did, and I was always fascinated by the Panama Papers story. This has definite. It was definitely inspired by the Panama Papers affair, and people forget the Pandora Papers that the Washington Post was involved in. It was extraordinary amount of documents and details that came out of that. And what those papers really revealed is that there's this giant other hidden system out there of secret money. And I put the estimate in the afterword of the novel. I guess we're up to about $454 trillion worth of money in private hands these days. And, maybe 10% of that is just completely off the books, hidden, stashed in this, what the journalist Jake Bernstein refers to as the secrecy world. It's out of touch, it's hidden, it's held in anonymously. And I would argue, I use the word kleptopia to describe this system. The great Anne Applebaum has a book coming out in a couple of weeks called Autocracy, Inc. And if you just look around the world right now, from Russia, its satellites, China, Turkey, there is just a growing movement of kleptocratic autocrats who are stealing money from their people, using their positions to enrich themselves, enriching the people around them, and they're stashing it around the world to the detriment of their own populations. And
A
I
line
think
from a bad
is
guy
a profound threat to democracy.
a line from A Death in Cornwall is, if you're not offshore, you're nowhere at all. And that is a very fine line. And I also had not noticed until you spelled it out, Daniel Silva, the remnants of the British Empire are an archipelago of offshore money laundering.
We call
black holes.
the Second Empire. Okay, so obviously Britain was a global power. It was weakened as a result of World War I, which did tremendous damage to Britain, and again in World War II. And it lost its empire, but it retained that small Second Empire.
And we'll talk about that after the break. Don't go anywhere except to buy A Death in Cornwall. I'll be right back with Daniel Silva. Welcome back, America. I stepped on the outline there because I'm trying to get through a lot of the Daniel Silva musical references throughout A Death in Cornwall. And this is Mendelssohn's E minor violin concerto. We got Beethoven's Seventh coming up. And then we have some jazz artists, Bobo Stenson, who I've never heard of Miles Davis, of course. And then do you know that Miles Lennox is a jazz artist, Daniel?
I do not.
Yeah, he's a young jazz artist in L.A., but I didn't think you knew that because not a good character, but we'll come back to that. Daniel, I've got a list. Things I do not, things I didn't know when I started, and things I'm glad to see in print again. So I want to do the things I did not know, because this is the important stuff. Every thriller should educate. I didn't know that Diane Modestini is really a restorer, and the great one. I didn't know that Suzanne
Diane is the restorer who did the Leonardo.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, but I didn't know she really is the best in the world. So I thought, wow, that's
she's one of
cool.
the best in the world.
I did not know. You've mentioned the Geneva Freeport before, but I didn't really know how you could structure a transaction using the art strategy to take place offshore and anonymously. And you write the Freeport never gives up its secrets. And then just expand on that. Would you tell people about the Geneva Freeport? We've touched on it briefly before, but it's really central to this book.
The Geneva Freeport is, if you go to Geneva, you can visit the outside of it. It's a giant, looks like a big aircraft hangar, basically, in the southern sort of drab industrial part of the city. And the concept started as for grain storage, believe it or not, a century or so ago. And it's now basically a storage facility, a tax-free storage facility for the global super rich. It is filled with exquisite cars, wine collections, gold bars, everything you can think of, and probably 1.2 million paintings. And
that's so
the largest, most valuable art collection on earth is in this warehouse in Geneva. And as I explain in the book and in the afterword, under the rules of the Freeport, if I had $200 million to spend at Christie's in New York, and I wanted to buy whatever painting, if I wanted to buy a Jackson Pollock that night, I could have Christie's ship it to the Freeport for me, and I would pay no sales tax on that transaction. That's a lot of money, by the way, in New York. Okay, if you spend $200 million on art, then it sits in the Freeport, and you can sell it in the Freeport. And you can sell it to someone else who has a vault in the Freeport and just moves to the next vault. But these transactions increasingly, and art is very, very secretive. many of these transactions, if not most of these transactions, are conducted by shell corporations. People hide their identities in the art world behind shell corporations. And so a painting is changing hands in Geneva, but the sale is taking place out there in the offshore ether, in some offshore tax haven. The shell company, completely invisible. And it doesn't take a genius, as I point out, to see that this is a perfect way to launder money and conceal wealth.
It is a great refuge of the corrupt. And in A Death in Cornwall,
over the centuries, in fairness, it's been a great refuge for the rich to park their money in during turbulent times, either turbulent economic times or turbulent political times. I don't mean to sound overly judgmental, but we, the United States and European law enforcement and governments have awakened to the fact that art, fine art, especially really high-priced fine art, is increasingly being used for purposes of money laundering, pure and simple. And the other thing is that the art world is so opaque that, and the transactions are so opaque, you can have a transaction that actually there's no actual painting involved, in my opinion. And we know that we have transactions where people are selling paintings to themselves, for example. They are the beneficial owner of both shell companies involved. So as one of my favorite people from the art world tells me, it's a murky swamp, the art world, and that line found its way into the book. It is a murky swamp,
I got that line. Dealers are the slimy green scum that floats to the surface with a few notable exceptions. So not all art dealers are in the pond, but the bad ones float to the top.
It is a ruthless business. Art dealers and galleries come and go, and there are some very, very, very fine dealers, art dealers, including some of my close friends. And there are a lot of bad people and corrupt people out there.
Now, Daniel Silva, we're talking on the day of the British elections, but we're also going to look at the French elections in a couple of days. And it looks like Le Pen's party or the far left are going to be in power, not Macron, who's the centrist. And we are reminded in The Death in Cornwall of how the Nazis looted art and how that art is not back to its rightful owners, but still moving. We know a lot of it's in Russia and it's never coming out, but we know some of it's, or we suspect some of it's in the Geneva Freeport, right?
Well, we think that we should back up. That let's just say that the Nazis looted the continent from east to west. Okay, as part of the occupation of all of the European countries, but they really attacked the French, and the French were able to conceal much of the Louvre's collection, but they went after the big Jewish dealers. They went after the big Jewish collectors, and they took hundreds of thousands of paintings and other objets d'art out of France. We were able to recover a lot of it miraculously, but a lot of it is still missing. A lot of it found its way into the French state museums, and a lot of it changed hands. The French art market was still active during the occupation, and a lot of Jewish people had to sell things under duress, and so there was just a case very recently about Picasso, as a matter of fact, about a family trying to regain a Picasso that they claim was sold under duress. There's all kinds of subcategories of the story, and this is what the book deals with: that there are these thousands of paintings still floating around the art world, and museums with a conscience and collectors with a conscience want to make sure that they're not buying a painting with a dubious past, and that is something that I explore in this book in detail.
Oh, and very in a way that I can understand it, so anyone can understand it, because the art world is a mystery to me, except what I've learned from Daniel Silva, and A Death in Cornwall really lays it out. I got to ask you before I go on, have you seen the movie A Bag of Marbles, which is about the Great Paris Roundup in part? Have you ever seen that?
I have not.
A Bag of Marbles. You will love it. It's the Paris Roundup, and through the eyes of children. And a Jewish barber and his sons and wife have to flee the Great Paris Roundup. And I won't say anything more about it. And I don't want to give anything away in Daniel Silva's new novel, the A Death in Cornwall, but part of it is tied to the Great Paris Roundup by the Nazis of the Jews of Paris in 1942 on one day, basically, right? 18,000 people?
I think it was more like 13,000 people that were involved in the July Roundup. If there's another, there's been a couple of good film depictions of it. It's a terrible day in French history. It took the French years until Jacques Chirac in the 1990s finally acknowledged the French role in it and what happened. You referenced a moment ago that France might actually have a far right prime minister and government in the near future. It's something that I wrote about in a few books ago, and I didn't dare to imagine that it was possible.
Yeah, incumbents are losing. You referenced the migrant crisis, and when we come back from break, we're going to talk about that. You're right. It's 13,000 on July 16th, 1942. I made it in my notes, but I was thinking 18,000 because that's what happened. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back with Daniel Silva, except to get A Death in Cornwall, his brand new bestseller. I think it'll debut at #1 on the New York Times list, but you need to get yours immediately. I've already got 3 people asking me for my pre-publication copy. They can't have it because it's got my notes in it. Don't go anywhere. Not a dummy. He always tells some interesting backstories, and here there is a backstory of one African street merchant who deals in fake Prada on the streets of Paris, and Amadou Kamari is his name, from Senegal. And the story basically, the outline of the story of every African migrant that you see in Italy or anywhere you go in France or anywhere you go all over the continent is told here. And I'm glad you did, Daniel Silva, because Ken Follett has also done this now. And people pass them by. They don't realize what they had to go through to get to sell the fake Prada.
Yeah, we look down our nose at them. We find them annoying. We don't like the bags of the fake Gucci and Prada bags strewn across the sidewalk. Their presence is straining. We were talking about France a moment ago. Has really exacerbated political tensions in the West, in France in particular. But they are human beings, and I think that if we were in the same position that they were in, if that's where life's lottery had landed us, we'd probably be doing the same thing. We would be trying to get to a new place and to try to make a better life for our children. And I just hope that people can realize that behind that face and those tattered clothes, there is actually a human being who, through no fault of his own, is trying to make it in this world. And by the way, his country is probably ruled by a corrupt thug or a corrupt gang, and that corrupt thug might well be laundering his money through the London laundromat.
I got London comes up again. I don't know if you ever watched the television series Poldark. My wife made me watch about two episodes.
A million years ago.
Well, it's all in Cornwall about 300 years ago, and it's all the same scene of galloping along the cliffs of Cornwall. I laughed when I saw the Cornwall stuff, but I didn't remember Timothy Peele until you told me about him in the book, which is the art of the backstory, of course. And I'm glad he's back, and it tells you how long Gabriel Allon has been successfully combating bad guys because Timothy Peele is now in the fight.
He is a Detective Sergeant Timothy Peele of the Devon Cornwall Police. And Gabriel is in the country at the time of a brutal murder of a Oxford professor named Charlotte Blake. And Charlotte Blake is an art historian, but she specializes in provenance research. And the provenance of a painting is basically its history of ownership and exhibition. Its timeline, if you will. And the provenance of a painting is incredibly important. Who owned it when? Who had it next? It helps to establish the attribution and authenticity of a painting. And, of course, if there are some murky transactions, say, in Paris in 1942, 1944, well, maybe you don't want to have anything to do with that painting because it might have come from a Jewish collector. So provenance is incredibly important, and it's incredibly important these days when we're dealing with pieces that may or may not have passed through France or Germany or Switzerland during World War II.
When I was thinking of reading about Timothy Peele, we are consumers of Fred Thursday and Captain Bright and Endeavor Morse. I'm just thinking that Timothy Peele's sort of like Endeavor Morse. If you watch that, anyone out there listening, we have a new character to get familiar with. The goat's back. I'm just going to throw that out there. If you don't know anything about Daniel Silva novels, you won't know what that means. But then you'll know a lot is back in here. Did you make a list at the start of this? Because it is very surprising, this book. And we got a minute to go, and then I'm going to come back and add a bonus for the podcast. But did you make a list of characters that you wanted to reference at the beginning of the book, Daniel?
I don't outline. I sort of broadly conceive. I have a sense of maybe the first 100 pages or so of the book. But then one of the things I do when I'm working on a book is which characters I'd like to bring back and how. My wife, Janie Gangel of CNN, has been asking me for years to bring Timothy Peele back.
Good for her.
This book for him. And I created this book for him.
He could launch a BBC show. I'm convinced of it. Don't go anywhere, America, if you're listening to podcasts. There's more. But this is the end of our 4th of July broadcast. So go off and get Daniel Silva's brand new A Death in Cornwall. Boy, will you thank me. And then you can go back to the beginning and start. But you won't have to, and you won't get. Anna Rolfe's back, too. So everybody's back. Stay tuned, America, to this great station. I'll be back tomorrow on the 5th of July. Welcome back, America. This is the bonus part of my Daniel Silva interview, July 4th interview, available on the July 4th podcast. Daniel, one of the things I'm very happy is in this book is one of the Allon's children is on the slippery slope to militancy. And if you've seen the folks in Great Britain attack Stonehenge last month, our friend Tom Holland, a friend of the show, I think probably a friend of yours, great British historian, said, way to go, destroy the endangered lichen on the Stonehenge, you dummies. And then they do dumb stuff against art. They must drive you crazy, but then you've got one of the Allon children is on the dangerous slope to militancy.
You know what? She is, we're talking about Irene. Gabriel has young twins, and she is possessed with, she's a true climate alarmist. And it's a family joke that she's, he's afraid that, he's an art restorer, and his greatest fear is that his young daughter is going to start defacing art. But no, she's not truly on that. It's more tongue in cheek. But she does have. She is profoundly worried about the climate. Gabriel Allon makes his home in Venice, which is sinking, and the sea is rising. She's a wonderful character.
She is, and as is the twin brother, who is never going to be confused for any of the Hewitt clan because of his particular abilities.
Yeah.
But let me close, Daniel Silva. But I told you already, the line I liked least, because my name is in it, but it's not me. I'm blaming this on Hugh Grant. Hugh always said the right things about the war in Ukraine, but I was never sure his heart was really in it. That isn't me, because my heart's really in it. The refreshing line.
I sort of blended. Look, you can obviously tell that the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers were a huge inspiration for this plot, but this plot was really inspired by the 7 or 8 weeks in the autumn of 2022 when we had 3 British prime ministers.
Yep.
And this is not some fly-by-night party we are talking about.
Oh, it's a great ending for Anglophiles like me. I love this ending because it's like when first Prime Minister of Victoria was Lord Melbourne, and he was dismissed by the Parliament, but the Queen, who was new, said, "No, I'm keeping him," so he had to come back. So I thought, well, this is really good. My refreshing line is, "A deal's a deal, Nicky." And then the laugh out line, laugh out loud on page, I'm not going to give it away. It's late in the book. We're British, Alon. We specialize in awkward dinner parties. I thought that was very funny, Daniel Silva.
There were some scenes in here, my editing technique is my wife and I read the book aloud 2 or 3 times. But
Smart.
As we edit aloud, and there are some scenes in here where I couldn't read them without cracking up.
That awkward British party. I was told a story about the Queen receiving someone. Oh, Martin Gilbert in Scotland, and there were some people who were not prepared to meet the Queen. But no one is ever made to feel uncomfortable by the royal family. Daniel, I want to close by asking this: Israel is in convulsions. Has been since October 7th. I cover it every day. I'm deeply worried that even by the time of the end of the show, that the war in Lebanon will have begun. What's it been like writing this year for you? Because you obviously are a dear friend of the Jewish state, and it's just been, as am I. I've got the flag hiding behind me because I went to the March on the Mall that I bought there, but it's just, they're exhausted, and it's a long way to go. What do you think about it?
I would say that I would back up and say that Israel has been in convulsions well before October 7th. I actually put a line in the last book when Gabriel was in Israel that where he is predicting that there's going to be a massive attack on Israel. And I took it out in the end because I didn't want to.
Oh, I didn't remember. Okay, no wonder.
Yeah, no, it's not in the book. I was afraid this was going to happen. My only hope was that Israel was so divided that Hezbollah and Hamas wouldn't do anything to unite Israel. And the Israeli people are united to a degree that is masking deep fissures within Israeli society itself. And so while we have this looming and growing external threat, we also have a situation where the country internally is tearing itself apart. Do
you read Haviv Redig Gur or listen to him?
No.
Oh, he's a fabulous center-left, I would guess, journalist for the Times of Israel. He's on with Dan Senor often. And
Okay.
Habib is open. He's 45 and a young dad, and he's got two nephews in Gaza, and he's really very good. I want to close, Daniel, by talking with you about a different Danny. Danny Pletka of the American Enterprise Institute was on my show June 24th, and
Uh-huh.
Iran is now 3 weeks from breakout. They've increased by 300% their uranium enrichment. She suggested that the best experts say they can have 9 nukes in a matter of a month or
Yeah.
two.
I,
What do you think we ought to do about that?
well, uh, we probably should have kept them as flawed as the original agreement was. We probably should have kept them within the confines of the original agreement. I think that in hindsight, I never supported. I thought it was flawed, but I did not think it was a good idea to rip that agreement up. And now here we are. 3 weeks to get the uranium up to speed to a weapons grade. I think it's probably shorter than that. With all due respect, I think it could be a matter of days that they could do it. And I've been talking to my sources about the big picture and what we're looking at here, and we might be looking at a decade or more of constant low-grade warfare. And my sources, who have connections to the intelligence world, tell me that the Iranians know that they're winning. That Israelis are getting second passports. Israelis are fatiguing of this, and this is existential. What's going to be happening in the next few years? This is game on.
Yeah, low grade warfare is, I think, the best case scenario. Ehud Barak sort of pounded the table with a past president, and I know this on good authority, saying this could be over in an hour if you Americans would use your strategic bombers. I asked Michael Oren recently, why doesn't Israel?
That has been a talking point. Just let us have it for an hour is the line way I hear it. Let us have it for an hour.
Yep.
God, I don't know about that. I've never accepted that it's one raid and we can wipe out their entire.
Oh no, it's not. I don't either. It's the Serbian, Kosovo, Bosnian air campaign all over again, and if it's with a different kind of power. But this isn't North Korea. This isn't a regime that wants to endure. It's a regime run by Islamist fanatics who believe in getting the hidden imam out of the well. I really am worried, Daniel Silva. I don't know that a novel can deal with this, but my goodness, what tense times we live in. And Alon's old friends got to stay in the game, right?
Yes, they do. It is such a failure of this vaunted intelligence system to not pick. Now, this is not the Mossad that's responsible for this aspect. This is Shabak and military intelligence that this got through. That the prime minister had been warned that something like this could happen. That the response was so slow. It's shocking on so many levels.
I agree.
And it speaks to a degradation and a rot, if you will, within the Israeli system.
This is why I listen to Yossi Klein Halevi, Daniil Hartman, Dan Senor, Habib Rediger, Michael Oren. Whenever they talk, I listen. I listen to the commentary podcast. We are in very serious times. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy your summer. And so
Yes. And so this in my universe. the universe that Gabriel inhabits. This has not happened yet, and so this is the book that I wrote is I like to blend genres, and I think I've achieved a blend of genres. So
Absolutely, you did. That's why it's very surprising.
Mystery, part murder mystery, part caper, and part political thriller. And
I know you've been talking to Hollywood for years.
Genre.
You've been talking. Go talk to the BBC about the Timothy Peele, because they make these. That's what they do. They need to go down to Cornwall and have Timothy Peele be a detective. So
he showed me something. He was very impressive the way he dealt with witnesses, and he seemed like it was great to pick him up so many years after the fact and imagine him as
my last salute to you. The coin collection. I'm not gonna say anything more. The coin collection is a beautiful touch. So I find it very satisfactory, very surprising. And now I have to give it to the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, who has to give it to her brother, who has to get. It's like going to travel from hand to hand.
It was a challenge. So how can I? I'm not going to give too much away, but how can Gabriel resolve one last mystery in the novel? And he just when you go along with him, you can see that he's always 3 or 4 steps ahead of everyone else.
Yep.
It's a wonderful little scene at the end. I'm very, very proud of it and very pleased with the novel.
You should be. My very favorite one remains the first Russian one, and I think it's Moscow Rules. My very, very favorite Alon novel is
that was a biggie. That was a big book.
But this is going to do so well because it's everything is in it that you need. It's a completely surprising Alon novel. Congratulations, Daniel Silva, and have a good 4th of July. My best to Jamie and your children, and I hope I see you soon.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you as always. Next July 4th, if not before. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.